Good morning, everyone. Thank you and welcome to our CAISO New Resource Implementation Forum for today. Thank you, Yelena, and for kicking us off. Today, we do have an agenda as shown here on the screen. We will kick things off with the NRI feedback themes and improvements with Andrew Brown and Kelsey Ajax. And there's a quick break for 10 minutes. We are targeting around 10. And then also the next agenda item, if you go back to the agenda, we do have the control protection inverter submission requirements of Scott Vaugh, and then we'll kick things off with Jacob, who'll be going over the energy data acquisition system EDAS responsibilities and improvements. And we also were going to do another quick break around 11:25. So in case we are running a little bit behind, we'll kind of work on the breaks for our audience here today. And then we'll have a last topic for pre-commercial resource performance with Kelsey Andrew Thompson. And then Kelsey will help us close out for today's forum. And then we go back to slide 1. We will have the housekeeping today. So for those who are on the WebEx, we will be utilizing the raise hand icon located in the middle of your screen. You'll be added to our queue. We also encourage all folks who are dialed in to make sure to provide your full name and affiliation before speaking. And also, we do have the Inteller Transparency View available on your very right screen. You can actually refresh that every time to see the live list of attendees on the WebEx. For those folks who are following us also, we have our event producer, Stacy, who will be helping us as well. And then we'll also be reviewing a few questions in the chat and providing those verbally throughout the call. Let's go to slide number 1 on the drop-down NRI feedback themes. And then also, we also have this call being recorded, and we'll be posting that within the next few business days. We also are aware that we don't have the presentations posted at this time, but we do plan to post those very soon. We thank everyone for your patience on that as we and the team provide those presentations later on. But at this time, we'll be sharing the ones for today and then also providing those later on. And I do see Kelsey. Go ahead, Kelsey, if you had to add on for that, but that's all my updates for now. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Did this work for you yesterday? That's all right. All right, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, that would help. Okie dokie. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for those that came in person and those online. I really appreciate you guys' participation in our CAISO NRI forum. So just a few reminders. You can raise your hand if you're online, or obviously raise your hand in the room if needed. Let's see. Okay, so why are we here today? So today is the second NRI stakeholder forum we've done. In the past, we did interconnection fairs where it was full beginning to end process, but we felt like there was a need to really focus in on just the NRI process and all the challenges that we faced with that. So, we really just wanted the opportunity to connect with you all, talk about the most recent challenges, what's going on, do some knowledge sharing, us to you, you to us, and just some collaboration amongst peers to kind of talk about how we can combat some of the challenges that we have with the ever-changing grid and the amount of projects that we're all dealing with. We want to make this a little different than it was last year. So those that attended last year and are attending again this year aren't hearing the same thing over and over again. So definitely encourage you to reference the video that we posted on the CAISO website, on the NRI page, to kind of review what we did last year. And we'll try to do a little different flavor, but it gives a really nice overview of the NRI process, gets into more details about like OMS card submission for testing and things like that you can reference back. But for the sake of today, we did do a recent survey on some of our NRI processes. So we're really drawing on those feedback themes to try to touch on some things that we're working on, we're aware of, and trying to improve. So we're gonna first talk about some structure changes we're doing within the team. talk about some improved documentation we're doing, as well as some timelines that we've shifted in the NRI process. And then talk about some of the RIMS challenges with the hybrid 2C rollout and some of the other things looking forward, what we want to do with RIMS to help make the process more streamlined. And then we're going to get into control and protection. We have Scott Vaughn here today, which is a nice treat, to kind of go through the submission process for that and challenges we see there. And then we're going to have Jacob go over some of our EDAS responsibilities, give some submission guidance, talk about how we're tightening up on some of our telemetry exemption criteria to help our operators have better visibility in the control room. And then he's also going to share some really awesome procedures that the team's been developing that I'm really excited about. I hope it's helpful for point-to-point 72-hour checks and things like that. And then we'll close up with me and Drew. So Drew is one of our grid operations manager in the control room, former lead generation dispatcher. And we're going to talk about some of the more testing related items, resource performance. There was some questions about how the process works when we place resources on hold when we detect a resource performance. So we'll walk through that process, make sure it's nice and clear for you all. And then we'll also go through a new test that we're piloting to try to get more hands-on experience with the performance of resources before they go commercial. So structure changes. So a model and contract implementation is a pretty big team. You know, we have our MPAI and NRI teams that really are in charge of kind of the project management, gathering the different requirements, making sure that all of our business units are doing their reviews, things like that. We have a scope of full network model. Those we do, you know, collect all the scope, make sure that all the late scope changes are done, works with all the teams to make sure all the validations, things like that, as well as ERM, which handles all the master file changes, and our DRS registration. And then EDAS has also been a part of MCI for a while now, but it's been something we've been talking about for a while. We've the last few years added about 6 headcount, and just, you know, the number of resources we have getting onboarded and just the amount of tasks that the team's dealing with between EIM, CAISO, we decided to separate out EDAS to have their own manager. And so Priyanka Nambury is the new manager of EDAS. Yeah, congrats, Priyanka. So not new to the company, obviously, or the tasks by any means. She's been here since 2010, expert in all things, seen the group through a lot of changes. So I'm really excited to have her step in this role and help guide the team. So we'll definitely still be collaborating really close. We plan to keep our team meetings the way they are, make sure we don't lose that disconnect. So don't worry about that there. And we'll be working together on especially the NRI related projects. So I just kind of wanted to touch on, since we do have some new team members who you face-to-face with on the new resource implementation side of the house. So I think most of you know Andrew Brown, who's our ops project coordinator lead, handling some of our more complex projects, the integration that goes into multiple systems, things like that. Our newest ops project coordinator lead is Daniel Bickley, joins us from West Virginia, just started here in August. So we're very excited to have his operational experience. We have Beverly Klein, who traveled here to be able to be with us today. Hopefully you guys all see her on NRI emails. And then we have Nura, who is joining us remotely. Also NRI support, and Amanda Morgan is in the back, our newest NRI support, and you'll start seeing some emails from her as well. And then we actually have one additional spot that we're filling too. So we're really trying to look at how the team's doing our tasks, especially when it comes to communication, follow-up, user support, to try to get you guys additional support on those NRI inquiries and just user interface. We know that that was a big theme of the feedback, response times, getting on top of that. So we are looking at new ways, some technology in-house to better manage some of those things that we, you know, maybe ping somebody else for and the email got lost. So we are looking ways that we can improve there, and that will be improvements to come. So I'm going to pass it off to Andrew, who's going to go into some of the more technical changes. And here you go, Mike.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I started using this lapel mic, and now everybody else wants to use it. So I feel like a trendsetter with that. For the NRI updates and improvements, again, taking some of the themes that we saw, and then just some of the issues that we've encountered over the past few years. I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the areas where we see issues both internally, so some of them are our own issues that we've seen and are trying to rectify, and then also issues that maybe are more on the customer side that we're looking for some partnerships to fix. So, and then also just some things that we have moving forward into the future that we think there's some areas for improvement. So one of the goals for the new resource implementation, is that we're trying to efficiently implement reliable resources into the CAISO grid. And that is like one of the biggest stress points that we have is reliability. That's our number one job as an independent system operator, is to make sure that the grid is reliable. And so resources that are going to impact that reliability, we won't be able to bring them onto the grid. That's just something that the ISO is not willing to compromise. And so that's something that, as far as expectations go, that shouldn't be something that is asked to, well, I know, can you just let me on, for a little bit, or can you just let us on? It's just one resource. What we do for one, we have to do for all. And so we end up with a lot of resources. And currently we already have a very high number of resources that are operating with telemetry exemption. So that would be like the primary way that if you had some kind of an issue is to request a telemetry exemption, which is then reviewed. And it's just not, with the number of resources that are coming online, we're looking to onboard probably over 100 resources this year. And so it's just not possible for us to continue to allow resources to come online that aren't ready to participate. So that being said, our goal is to get resources through the NRI process, get them on the grid and operating in the market. That is our purpose for being here. So that's just want to highlight that we're not looking for ways to say no, we're looking for ways to say yes, but we also have that reliability that we cannot compromise. So, so just wanted to highlight that. So some of the issues that are currently impacting new resource implementation and the energy industry as a whole. Currently, we have a high number of projects that are coming into the NRI queue. So you were to graph it. Last year, we had a graph that we used, and the number is just not quite a straight line, but it's increasing dramatically. And I'm sure all of you are experiencing that as well, whether you're consultants or developers, just the number of projects is rapidly increasing. The other issue that we're really seeing with a lot of these projects is the complexity of the projects. It's not where you have an easy project where it's just connecting straight into a bay and there's no issues and everything's great. There's always some kind of complexity, whether that has to be with like trying to figure out how to serve the retail service that the site requires. We're running into an area now where we have resources that are in the CAISO BA, but within a different retail service provider who's not in the CAISO BA. And so then there's complexities with that, where you're finding issues with how your interconnection is working, where you have multiple parties sharing a gen tie and making sure that the information needed for that gen tie is adequately updated. So a lot of complexity in the new projects, not just the easy ones where it's a solar resource connecting directly to a gen facility and no problems. The other issue is kind of we're seeing like this increase in the energy demands and then the resource adequacy requirements, which is leading to projects saying I really have to be online by this date in order to reach my RA requirements that I've already sold a contract for. And so we're seeing a lot more issues related to where there might be construction delays, permitting delays that are then having this kind of cascading effect down of financial impacts and then also reliability impacts. So we're keenly aware that resource adequacy is essential for reliability, and so we are trying to figure out ways that we can accommodate projects that have that, but also keeping in mind we also have to be fair. So if we accelerate for one project, we have to accelerate for all projects, and then you have where every resource is suddenly an emergency. So that's one of the areas that we're really I think the escalations that we get a lot of times are difficult because you want to say yes. You want to be a partner for people, and you don't want to, punish either a load serving entity or the, generator operator, generator owner. But we have to also maintain those processes that we have in place. So, and then recently we have the elimination of the federal tax credits, and that's putting a lot of pressure on increasing timelines. We have directives from the governor where they're looking for ways to accelerate some of these projects so that they can still meet the some of those credits, tax credit deadlines. And so we're aware of that. We're trying to figure out ways that we can accommodate the rush that we're expecting to get, also to make sure that we don't impact that reliability. So that's where you can see we are have a full staff here helping us, and we're looking at ways that we can try to optimize our internal processes as well. So we'll kind of cover some of those internal optimizations as well. But before we talk about what we're going to do, I want to talk a little bit about ways that you can help us with this. And so one of the first items is it takes a lot of time when we have projects where they haven't got all their prerequisite documents together, whether that's the interconnection agreement being completed, and we get a lot of requests for like, well, can you let me start the interconnection process or the NRI process? I don't have an interconnection agreement yet, but I will. And the issue we have with that is that you have to have an interconnection agreement in order to start the process. That's just the foundational document that says you can even do what you're saying you're going to do. And so we are really hesitant to allow projects that don't have an executed interconnection agreement start the NRI process. So if you can have that, that is immensely helpful for us, because then we don't have to go back and forth with, do you have it? When is it going to be signed? Oh, there's another delay because the PTO can't sign it. Like, those are the issues we run up to, is because it's no longer our ability to just move forward. Then we become dependent on the PTO signing it or some other party signing the interconnection agreement, and it can really delay the projects, as far as their ability to stay in the original model build that they were shooting. So no open MMAs or anticipated MMAs during the NRI process, and we'll cover this in a little bit greater detail because MMAs are becoming a way of life. We recognize that, but we also want to talk about the best practices for that. The other item is that resources should be construction ready. We don't want the single line drawing or the control and protection or stuff like that to be, out for bid documents. They should be construction ready projects. And then making sure that you review the full network model schedule and those timelines to ensure that your project schedule is feasible. We run into a lot of times where people will suddenly sign an RA agreement and say, I need to move up my COD date by 3 months. And it's like that, you got to get a time machine if you want to meet that date. And those are just kind of the hard facts of this, is that the schedule in some ways can be expedited, but if you are behind on your modeling, there's no way to make that time up. And so projects should not count on expedited reviews or additional model builds. That's just not something that we can accommodate for the most part. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the timelines here in a little bit. The other item is for achieving CAISO commercial operation approval. That means when we provide take a step back. When you request COD or COM, you're stating that your project is ready to participate in the markets, that everything is done. You're not still doing commissioning. The project is commercially viable, ready to operate in the markets. So it's it's not really fair to request a bunch of expedited reviews and then say, can I go on outage afterwards because we still have to finish our commissioning. That's not something that we're going to be super excited to support. We recognize that there may be some extenuating circumstances in some cases where that is something that has to happen due to some kind of a fault or equipment failure, but the norm should not be, we had 72 hours of good telemetry, now let us, come into the market, and then as soon as all the construction folks leave, everything falls apart. It's not the intended outcome here. So the other thing that I want to bring up is that resource adequacy timelines, they are not included in the NRI process. So if you have a resource adequacy contract that you need to meet or an obligation that you need to meet, you should be accounting for those timelines prior to the selection of the model build you're going into. So if you need to be COD 45 days before a resource adequacy contract, make sure to account for that in your timeline, that your COD date is not the date that you're supposed to provide resource adequacy. You have to be COD 45 days prior to the date you're supposed to provide resource adequacy. And actually a little bit beyond that, because we need some processing time between the CAISO and CPUC. So some of those timelines that are after the fact need to be accounted for when you're setting up your project schedule. So now the other big topic that we have is material modification requests. And I think almost every project we recognize from the time that they go through the interconnection the interconnection request process, you're putting in inverter information that's available at the time. And then when you get to actual construction, it might be 3, 4, 5 years later. And at this point, inverter technology has progressed. And why would you use, 4 or 5-year-old inverters? So we understand that you're going to be using, that there's going to need to be an MMA to update some of the equipment that you're purchasing or procuring at that time. So the material modification request should be completed prior to starting the NRI process. That doesn't mean you start the MMA process or you start the NRI process. It means you complete the MMA process before you start the NRI process. The MMA is a modification to the LGIA. And like I mentioned before, the LGIA is the foundational document that says you can interconnect to the grid. So if you're modifying that with equipment that is not approved at this time and you try to start the NRI process, you're trying to start the NRI process with equipment that's not approved at that time. So that's where it's very important that the MMA is completed prior to beginning the NRI process. If you do have to start an MMA during the NRI process, depending on what that change is, it could result in the project being placed on hold until the equipment is approved. So if you're changing inverters or transformers or gen-tie items, that can result in the project being placed on hold until that equipment is approved. So we want to make sure that you're taking into account the time that it takes to complete the MMA into the project schedule. So that's something that you would need to work with queue management if you have an interconnection group within your own company to make sure that they're aware that these changes need to be submitted prior to starting the NRI process. And so one of the things that we've heard is like, well, it's really hard to do all of that. The lead time on the equipment that you're getting is probably around a year. So you have plenty of time, or longer, depending on what it is. So when you're placing those orders for that equipment, you should be figuring out when you're gonna submit your MMA, and not after the equipment is on a trailer coming to the site, be like, oh, we need to do an MMA for this. That's not the time. The time is when you place that order for the equipment. So we really want to stress that a lot because it takes up a ton of time on our side to figure out what was originally submitted in the model. Does that match what was in the MMA? Do we need to remodel anything? Are there going to be any system impacts because we don't have the correct information in the model? It takes time on grid assets when they're doing the control and protection review because the inverters that are in RIMS under the queue management project don't match what was submitted in the control and protection documents. And so now he has to go figure out Where's the status of that MMA? Has the PTO signed off on it? Has our CAISO planning group signed off on it? It takes up a ton of time that he could be spending reviewing documents, and instead he's going and tracking through what was the latest MMA, what's been approved, and making sure that, you know, we have the right documents submitted that match what's in the approved either MMA or LGIA. So I really want to stress that these MMAs, we understand that they're a necessity. We get that. We're just asking for you to make those MMA requests and complete that process prior to starting the NRI process. So now improvements that we've done since we've been asking kind of a lot of all of you. So within the GRDT, there were some improvements made on the NRI webpage. One of the items that we did is a guidebook was created, and this is our ERM group. They created a guidebook that would assist in preparing that final GRDT. And so it highlights what information is required, and then also has a link to the GRDT definitions. The other thing we added was an example GRDT, and it also includes tips for each column on how to fill those out and what information should be included. And then there was also a sample template for the GRDT explanation document. And you can kind of see that's, if you go to the NRI webpage, we have a little clip right there that shows the different documents and the links to them. If you're curious on what they look like, so it's essentially the GRDT guidebook is a Word document, and it goes through each one of the different tabs that's on the GRDT and explains what each one of those fields is. And then it also has that if they're in blue, they're required. So if the different RDT field is in blue, then that's a required document. And then the sample GRDT, you can see maybe on the bottom here, but that has the different fields that are required in yellow, and then if the field is not required, it's grayed out. And so hopefully that will assist in completing that GRDT requirement that we have for all these projects. So then another thing that we're doing is trying to be more transparent in the time that it takes for a lot of these document reviews. So previously we had said that the document review timeline was 10 business days. We've kind of changed that to 15 business days now, just facing the realities of the number of documents that we're receiving. And then also some of the back and forth that's required on those documents, that the review time is about 15 days. And so I think one thing to keep in mind with a lot of the documents that are submitted is that if we have to review them 2, 3, 4 times, that really ramps up the workload that we have. And so trying to complete those documents accurately in the first go is going to save everybody some time. So that's what our goal is, to get where we have provided enough information where projects can complete the documents correctly the first time. So we don't have to have multiple submittals, which creates more work for all of us. The other thing that we've changed is the control and protection timelines now have a review timeline of 30 days. This is mostly just related to the complexity of the documents that are being submitted. Grid Assets is, you know, they're averaging, they have a control and protection package around like 3,000 pages of information to run through when they're looking through all of the, between like the relay settings, the inverter settings, the inverter reports, all of that just really takes a lot of time for them to review. Part of that, we're going to have a presentation that deals with the control and protection package. So Scott will be providing that shortly. As far as the COD reviews, those are now at 10 business days for most business units to review. We're working to update that message in RIMS because currently it still says 5 days. We're going to work to update that so it says 10 days instead to reflect the realities of the business review timeline. And then the other item is that the EDAS 72-hour telemetry reviews, those may exceed 10 business days, especially if there's a lot of back and forth on the communication between issues that are coming up, and then the time it takes to review and establish another 72 hours of telemetry. So those are the major changes that we have to our timeline. If you are looking for resources that can provide some help, so last year we did a full, I'll say, if you're like new to the NRI process or it's been a while since you've done the NRI process, we have a full presentation that was put together last year with a video. And so we have the presentation that you can review, which runs through the NRI process. There's a video, it's about a 4-hour video because it covers the NRI process. There's also some information in there on the EDAS process, and then we also have information related to our real-time environment. So when you're getting to test energy, that was provided by Drew, one of our grid operations managers. So there's a lot of information in that video. The other item we have is our computer-based training for markets and operations. There's a number of trainings in there. We have started adding our project type overviews. So the two newest project types that were added into RIMS were distributed energy resources and then our scheduling coordinator meter entity projects. And so for each one of those, we added a computer-based training that runs through the process, how to complete the project details form for each one of those, how to start the project, complete the project details form, and then what to expect as you're making your way through the project. So our goal is to start making some of those for each project type. So we'll be working through that over the course of the year. It will probably take us a while, kind of resource intensive to create them. So it will take us a little while to get through all of the project types. The other item that we have is a resource owners and operators desk reference guide. This is something that was put together by our client relations and stakeholder engagement. And so that covers a wide range of items. It's kind of a interactive desktop manual that you can look through that covers a bunch of different areas that would impact both an owner and an operator. And it's pretty helpful for projects as you're moving through the NRI process and getting into the test energy operations phase. But the computer-based training, I do want to really push to at least go and take a look at it. There's a lot of information in there related to resource adequacy, other areas that are not necessarily directly within the NRI process, but would provide kind of some guidelines for individuals that want to learn more information about how the CAISO operates. All right, so the other item that we're working on are RIMS enhancements. So this past year, we rolled out quite a few enhancements to RIMS, the SCME projects and the DARA projects. Those went pretty well as far as the rollout to those. An item that may not have gone quite so well was our short-term forecasting module rollout. The forecasting module is based on the next generation of the RIMS framework. So RIMS currently, the current framework that RIMS has is old, about 10 years old. And so it's at its end of life. So there's going to be a new framework that they're using. So there were complications related to having two different frameworks at the same time and the access issue that was related to the two frameworks. When we were working in the stage environment on the testing for it, the system doesn't do the same level of validations in the same way that it does when you get into the production environment with external entities. There's not really a way to test it in a real world way, which previously had not been an issue that we'd ever encountered where there were access issues. But because this is two separate modules within RIMS, there was an issue that wasn't identified. And so that's where a lot of you ran into issues with access. The other item that we ran into is just the variety of GIS software that's out there, and then the particulars of how the code was set up. And so some real learning experiences as far as interacting with new software, outside software. For most of the documents that we have, they either will take like either a PDF or a Word document or Excel file. Those are all very standardized. When we got to the shape files and the GIS files, it's not standardized how those are put together, which led to a number of issues that we're still working through and trying to document. So we are looking to update our documentation to include some of the best practices for how to do these submittals. as we work through it. The plus side of working through this new framework is that some of you may have noticed it's web-based, and it will also alert you if there's an issue. So we're looking to use that in the future, where when you're submitting your documentation, if there's an obvious error, it's going to flag it right away. You won't be able to submit it. It will tell you that there's an obvious error with a detailed message that explains, like, this field can't have this value, it needs to be updated. So the idea is that a lot of growing pains right now, but in the future, we're hoping that it'll be a time saver for all of us as we move into the future of what RIMS can do. So the other item we have is the SCME process is moving into RIMS. We have a CBT out on this, and we're looking to probably make that change coming up. The beginning of November is what we're targeting. If you are in the CAISO BA, it will work exactly the same way as any other project that you create in RIMS, where you'll create the project, your UAA will then have to request access to the project and then provision access to you. So the SCME projects will be under the meter and rig maintenance tab within RIMS. So that will be the standard way that it operates, the same as any other item. If you are outside the CAISO BA, we did a presentation yesterday on this, and you could refer back to that. So, all right. So looking forward, so right now we're working through requirements for 2026 updates for RIMS. And so these are requirements that we're looking to put into place within 2026. And so those requirements are going to be to update our COD projected date calculations. Right now they say 5 days, and it's based off of, it says, like, assuming the MSVS has been accepted, which it has to be accepted prior to. So we'll be updating some of that language. But essentially that COD projected date will get moved out. The other item that we're going to add is a bucket 6. I'm going to kind of jump down here. Those are related. Bucket 6. Currently there's like a bucket 6, but it's hidden. So you have your PTO COD approval that has to be submitted. We're going to add in an item where we can see where the 72-hour test is at, whether that's been completed or not. And then the other item is the COM plan. And so if you were requesting COM, then you submit a COM plan. Otherwise, it would not be required. But having that bucket 6 ability to track, we think will be helpful for us because sometimes those are items that they have to be submitted, but they're not submitted, in time, and then you end up with this where the project's kind of languishing, and there might be confusion on whether or not some of these items have been completed or not. The other item that we're doing is we're going to update the control and protection required documents. And so part of that is we're going to be removing some of the validations that are done with that macro-enabled spreadsheet, the control protection inverter document. So we'll be removing the validations that are done with that, which should make it easier to upload. A lot of times now we'll have issues where, because that spreadsheet is so large, it just for some reason won't be accepted. And there's times where we've really struggled to figure out why that's the case. And so the validations don't really serve like a major purpose because they mostly are just validating against information that's not consequential to the project, like making sure the project name is right on the beginning tab, not something that is entirely important, when what we're really interested in is what are the inverter settings, what is like more detailed technical information. So removing some of those items. And then the other thing we're going to be doing is adding in a spot for the inverter report to be submitted. That used to be a required document, is removed. We're going to be adding that back in so you can upload the inverter report in one spot. One of the issues that we have is our grid assets team will review these as a package, and then they struggle with keeping track of what all has been submitted and what's been reviewed. So a lot of times you'll see there'll be a note where they'll say, like, we're still missing the inverter report. We have the inverter settings, but we don't have the inverter report. And so then there's a delay, and it's hard for them to know when everything has been submitted, especially when you might have, like 30 different files that you've uploaded, depending on how many delays and whatnot you have. So those are some areas that we're looking to kind of improve that will hopefully help our grid assets team be able to review documents faster, will help you as a customer know what documents have been submitted, and then will also allow them to start accepting documents. Right now, currently, if they accept one document, it marks the whole bucket item as completed, which is kind of hard for them because you might say, like, well, I submitted this document, you said it was fine, but you didn't accept it. And that's the main reason why, is because RIMS has just one item that says required. If you accept one document that's under that bucket item, it marks the whole bucket item as completed. And so in order to avoid confusion, they will normally hold off on doing any of the approvals, and then it's on them to manually track it, which is kind of difficult for them to do. So those are the updates that we're looking to do in 2026 that will affect the CAISO BA. We're also looking to do a number of internal enhancements that will hopefully help us with more efficient review process, kind of speed up things. And then looking to the future, as I mentioned before, RIMS is at its end of life. And so I should say the current framework for RIMS is at its end of life. And so we're going to be exploring what kind of requirements we want in RIMS in the future, and starting to kick off that process. What we have started kicking off that process of what we don't want to call it, the next version may not even be called RIMS, because it's kind of a reimagination of what we need now as opposed to what we needed 10 years ago. And so currently we have more of a document management system, and we need more of a process management system. And so those are some of the items that we're going to be exploring in the design of whatever ends up replacing RIMS. So that we'll be working on, well, we're already working on it now, and then we'll continue that work into the future, but it will be a complete redesign of RIMS. So the processes will largely stay the same. We haven't talked about like reimagining the NRI process, but if we can find some efficiencies, we'll probably be incorporating those changes. And one of the things we're very excited about as far as the capabilities that we have in this like next generation framework is that cloud-based web forms where we can have a lot of those validations done immediately. And we've been spending a lot of time talking about, well, how can we link some of our other like databases that we have or processes that we have kind of scattered around in different tools and stuff. How can we move those all into one central area? And that would speed up the process. So if you wanted to do a rig project, RIMS would know what the rig number is based on the resource ID, you know, and so it would tell you right away, like, that's not the right rig ID, or to automatically assign the meter device ID. So when you submit your document, you're not waiting, you know, for somebody in EDAS to go through and review. It will automatically assign those meter device IDs so that you can continue on with your process. So those are some of the things that we're excited about to look into the future. High level, we're looking to have the requirements kind of written out in 2026 and to have them start doing the coding for it in 2026 as well, and hopefully have like a rollout in 2027. So yeah, so that's kind of the wrap up of what we've talked about here, the structure changes, some of the enhancements between the GRDT training that we've had. MMAs, really want to stress MMAs because they're causing us a lot of rework, and they just turn into a time sink for a lot of these projects because we have to go back and talk with our OEs, our NetApps, the real-time operators to figure out whether or not we can allow a project to move forward if it started the MMA process. And those directly cause delays to your project because it takes us time to figure out. But even if you are doing your MMA correctly, if you know your say like another developer isn't, that's time that we could have spent reviewing your documentation that we have to spend figuring out what their what kind of issues we're going to have with them. So it really does turn into a time sink for us that affects everyone. So So questions?
This is Pat McCarthy, Artisan Grid. With respect to the MMAs, you mentioned process improvements elsewhere. Do you have any MMA specific process improvements? And the one that comes to mind, since you kind of mentioned it, is 80% of the inverters out there are analogous to like the Ford F-150 XLT white four-door that everybody buys. So everybody specs one in 2022. Now 2025, and they just make the 2025 model year update. So do you guys have any, I would hope there's some process improvements on your end to maybe expedite some of those very standard and, used to be immaterial modifications. Anyways, thoughts?
Yeah, so that's, I don't know if we have anybody from Q Management on, but Q Management is actually who handles that MMA process. And so for us, we generally just get notified that there's been an MMA that's been started. So I do know that it's a struggle for them as well, because just for managing all of them, the issue we run into is like some projects will have 14 MMAs. So it's not just where they're updating the inverters, it will be where it's almost a complete, do-over of the project by the time they're done with it, but it's done like one or two at a time. And so they're working on updates. We are, like, to answer your question, yes, we are trying to figure out how to improve the efficiencies of the MMA process. Some of that for us is like tracking to know right away, like if there is an MMA to work through, like you said, like what is a material change and what's not a material change. If you're changing the COD date, that's not something we're gonna like hold up the project on. But we have a lot of like projects where it's like, well, we're changing the transformers, we're changing the inverters, we're changing the gen tie. And now it's not the same project that it was, before. And so making sure that those items are all reviewed is where we kind of run into this delay at. And so for part of that, I think is what you're asking is, can you give us a list of like, this is not a material change that we don't need to like worry about it impacting the process. We are working through to come up with some kind of a list for that. One of the hesitancies we have is that sometimes they'll lump together a bunch of changes. So it's like, well, those two are not material, but these other ones are, but it's all in the same MMA. And then they either get approved or don't get approved as an entire MMA. They don't do, the PTOs and stuff don't do like a la carte, where like we can accommodate this change and this change, but not this one. They just approve it all or don't approve.
Appreciated. Thanks.
Hi, Andrew. We don't have any questions in the queue at this time. Once again, we did get one more question.
Kelsey,
it's
I
from
can
Kelsey.
send that over to you.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I wrote down the question or the suggestion. Yeah.
Thank you.
It looks like we don't have any other questions in the room. Okay, we are going to take a 10-minute break and we will be back at right at 10 o'clock. Hello, welcome back from our break. We are going to go to control protection and inverter submission requirements with Scott Vaughn.
Yeah. All right, this mic works too. This morning, really quickly, I'm going to just go through the control and protection inverter submissions through RIMS, bucket 3 and bucket 5. And so, as already discussed, it'll be at the end of my slide anyway, but I'll just say Mr. Brown did a great job on the MMAs. First thing I always check is if the inverter matches what's in the app and study. And if it's not, you guys are going to have to talk to somebody on MMA, and they take a long time from what I'm understanding. We're trying to do better, but understand that there's quite a delay in MMA. So without further ado, we'll talk a little about the file submission requirements. As we all know, RIMS is very particular. So what we've copied straight here out of the NRI guide is the format you'll need to use to define the files that you're going to submit for review by me in our department. So I review these along with another gentleman, Lou Fonte. And so if you ever have any questions, you can either reach out to me or Andrew or anyone in NRI, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. So some important parts about the control and protection, which is just basically the protective relays. What we're looking for there is we want them to be submitted in PDF. We don't want to have to pull an application-specific software from like SEL or someone to open up the settings. We'd like to have each relay, one relay per file. I know that makes a lot of submissions, but otherwise we end up with a 2,000 or 3,000 page document. It's very difficult to search through and a little frustrating. So next, we also need to see the single line diagrams. Now there's a couple different single line diagrams that people provide. Some are just switching diagrams that don't show the protective relays. So we're looking for the diagrams that show the protective relays. So there'll be like 87s. There'll be a 411L, there'll be the relays that'll show CT and PT connections. And so, and that's pretty much, we also use the 3-line diagrams, and 3-line diagrams, what we're looking for is to confirm that the PT connections are exactly what's on the single line, because those are used for relay inputs for determining the set points for like over voltage, under voltage, and those are probably other two, because we don't look at your distance protection. The second set that we look at are our inverters. And so what we need is that in the format that's defined there, we have a couple different, I usually end up with more than 2 files. We look for an attachment A, which hopefully you're all familiar with, which is an Excel-based format. There's a couple tabs on there that we're going to be very important. We asked on the project configuration tab whether there's going to be a DC coupled system, whether you're going to put out negative sequence, what you do for frequency control, those types of things. Bucket 5, when we get to bucket 5, what we're going to look for is before you go live that you have the test reports for each relay. And that's just to prove that they were tested to the set points that we've reviewed. And then we're also going to need the final settings. So control protection. And so the goals here are just to verify some of the things we look at is the frequency, voltage, and frequency ride through. And so it used to be PRC 24, which actually still is today, but it's soon going to be PRC 29, which I believe is October of next year. We look to confirm relay settings and the single lines match, and that we have overlapping zones and there's no gaps in the protection. And bucket 5 for control protection, like I said, we're just verifying what you submitted was put in the field and it still meets the requirements. Inverter review. This can be a little bit more complicated. The LGIA is very specific in performance reviews on what we look for out of the inverters. It's a performance-based standard. It also talks about reactive current injection. The attachment A has a summary of those control requirements, the short circuit contributions, and an overall plant design. It'll also list a lot of the times the control method used on the inverter tab. It also mentions the frequency set points that you have for tripping and ride-through requirements. Some of the other things we look at, as I already mentioned, was whether these are a DC plant, a DC connected plant. And what I mean is sometimes you have one inverter and you have a battery and PV hooked on the same DC system, and sometimes there's a flow controller inside there. So that's a little bit too much information, but what the heck. Additionally, we look for an inverter report, which comes straight from the manufacturer. And so this report, when you see these reports, a lot of times they have hundreds and hundreds of settings. We look for very specific settings out of there, K factors for reactive current injection during low voltage ride through or high voltage ride through. We also look for ramp rates on return from faults. We look for any time delays associated with return from faults. And those are some of the things we look for. We get a variety. We don't have a standard format for inverter reports, which I think is something that I've been trying to get to at some point so that we can make sure we get all the information that's needed, because a lot of times there's a lot of back and forth with the inverter report and the different manufacturers. Okay, and I already mentioned about MMAs. And so I just wanted to put it there again because it's super important that we have the proper inverters. Also, I wanted to put here that something that's not necessarily listed in attachment A, but is part of the LGIA, which is our data requirements. So you have to be synchronized to a GPS clock for up to 1 millisecond is the synchronization. And then all inverters must record data on a 10 millisecond granularity, and it'll be tagged to that synchronized to 1 millisecond. The triggers for data recording need to be set at the 0.9 per unit and 1.1 per unit so that we can get that data in the event that you see a transient, just to make sure you're performing as required. And I think that's it. So I'll take questions. Sure.
Hi, Scott. Pat McCarthy again. This room's just too quiet, so I feel like I have to make some noise in here. You mentioned some of the new upcoming PRCs, 28, 29, in that range. And we were both around for when you guys rolled out the Appendix H data capture requirements. And so there's going to be some overlap there now. Is there any intent on your end to update some of those data capture requirements to be more consistent with the NERC requirements?
So from my point of view, because I also investigate problems where we have to pull that data, while there is some higher granularity at certain levels for the PRC 29, it doesn't require every single inverter to have data, as I remember. And so that's a problem because you'll see in a string of inverters sometimes this one rode through fine, the next one didn't. Same on the other eye. So it's very difficult for me to say that we're going to get less than what the LGIA requires today. So if we went through the process, which is a stakeholder process to update the LGIA, we would incorporate the more stringent items, which is at the higher voltage levels, like at the transformer high side. But we wouldn't go ahead and get any less of the data requirements than we have down at the inverters. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that was actually my thought. Is some of the requirements I thought were a little slow. So, but yeah, appreciate the feedback.
Any other questions? Well, great. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, we're going to be switching over to the next presentation.
Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Jacob Halscher. I'm an EDAS Associate Specialist. I'm really excited to be here today presenting on behalf of EDAS. I joined the EDAS team about 2 years ago and since learned about 3,000 new acronyms. And I feel like I'm still just scratching the surface. So it's really like learning a new language. Really grateful for the EDAS team and for the CAISO community for welcoming me. I have background in helping water utilities in their SCADA systems commissioning, DR, microgrid design, stuff like that, and then a little bit of background in residential solar installation. So about 6 years in the energy space, but my time with EDAS has been a great highlight. So thanks, everyone. So yeah, just some reminders, they already covered these, but just for the remote attendees, keep yourself muted. Throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions. You can use those WebEx interactivity tools. So at a high level, we're going to be talking about some of the EDAS overview items. I wanted to give some insight into some of the EDAS responsibilities. Look at our EDAS team. We're going to cover some of our EDAS 2024 metrics. We're going to dive a little bit into the EDAS documentation requirements during the NRI process, as well as outside of the NRI process for meter projects, stuff like that. New exciting updates in the telemetry validation space, some new procedures that we're going to be talking about, so very excited to share those. And then some updates in the requirements for telemetry noncompliance, exemptions, and then I'll have some time at the end for discussion and wrap up. So at a high level, this is our EDAS team's responsibilities. So we're looking at the revenue metering or approved CAISO meters. Those are CAISO inspected and certified meters. We're handling all the meter data processing and corrections, in the settlements process. And then we're also looking at those SCME meters via the SQMD plans. We're also responsible for the direct telemetry via DMV3 devices. So any CAISO rig that is sending data up to the CAISO EMS and processed by our CAISO operators. Recently, we took over the Generation Desk Support Center, which is a telemetry monitoring desk. We're basically helping the generation operators take those telemetry calls, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on that. And then we're also responsible for all of the ancillary services testing, including regulation, non-spin, spin, black start, stuff like that. So this is just to give you guys insight into our EDAS team. I know Kelsey mentioned that our team has grown a lot, and just wanted to give you guys all of our names up here. Really excited to share we have 7 full-time employees and 4 full-time contractors. Our team has grown a lot in the past few years to support a growing interconnection queue, as well as some expanded EDAS responsibilities. So yeah, just thank you to all of our EDAS members for all the work that you do. So I've split up the next couple slides into like pre-COD and then post-COD. So I won't list all these out by name, but here on the left you can see all of the documents that EDAS is responsible for at a high level during the NRI process. So we're going to go into some specifics of the trends we've seen in the past year for the different types of documents and things that we've caught, but yeah, those are all those types of documents that we're going to be reviewing in the NRI process. And then on the right here, you can see we are responsible for the DMP3 point building. So when the single line diagram and those bucket 1 items are submitted, EDAS is responsible for creating those rig spreadsheets that get sent out to the resource owners, and then also responsible for any corrections for those. We're working closely with the full network model teams to get those implemented into our EMS system. We're responsible for the point-to-point testing. So, leading up to that, all those bucket 3 items get submitted and then the point-to-point test gets scheduled. EDAS is going to administer that test. And we're also responsible for all of these sync and COD reviews, including EDAS sync, operational readiness sync, and then the COD reviews, the EDAS COD 72-hour test, certificate of compliance, operational readiness COD. And then we're also responsible for those Regis QRE requests pre-COD. And just a reminder for those to submit those prior to the test energy, because we need that QRE request in prior to the test energy to include it. So now post-COD, we're responsible for a kind of a different set of responsibilities, right? So at a high level, the AS certification testing, regulation, spin, non-spin, black start, meter data processing, corrections, and then the meter exemptions. The telemetry noncompliance, so the rig notifications, issue tracking, sending out those emails, those weekly SC notifications, all telemetry exemptions. For our Regis, we're doing the uploads and corrections for those. We're handling the rules of conduct for metering and telemetry. And then our generation desk support center. So we are handling all those megawatt updates to the scheduling coordinators for a unit when it has gone into bad telemetry. We'll notify them of the issue, and then they will be calling us for, every 50 megawatts of change, so that we can input that into the CAISO EMS so the operators have that real-time visibility. We do administer the unannounced AS tests during those GDSC shifts, and we're on that call line, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30, kind of managing those real-time telemetry issues. This is really exciting for us because we're giving that time back to the operators, and we'll get into some metrics for that here in a little bit. And then more recently, we took over the AGC telemetry monitoring. So we are actually looking at all the units that are off AGC and where there might be a suspected telemetry issue. We're calling those SCs and telling them, we see this unit is off AGC. We need you to submit an OMS card so that we can, zero out the AS and get this unit back into compliance here. So that really helps our operators so that they can focus on the issues that matter more to them rather than taking these telemetry calls. And then we're also responsible for all of the field work post-COD, so point-to-point testing, and that would be distinct from, a new site. This would be like a new points or devices added to an existing site. The rig maintenance replacements, meter maintenance and replacements, communication maintenance, and then rig certificate renewals. And then I just wanted to point out that you can actually use the fieldwork request tool to request documents from EDAS. So, it's one of the selections in there, but just a reminder that feature is available. And then we also are managing that project helpline. So I'm sure many of you know Josh. He's a great guy. Give him a call. We spun that up about last year, and it's been very successful getting people aligned to talk to EDAS. So, and then I have a little caveat here. This doesn't cover everything. We do have some involvement in like the EDAM stand-up process, and then a bunch of other processes that EDAS is responsible for. So excited to share some 2024 metrics for EDAS. I was very excited putting this together. It's cool to see it all in one place, and this isn't all inclusive, but this is our 2024 numbers, and this is on the left we have our 2024 fieldwork appointments. So some of the highlights I want to point out is for point-to-point tests, we did 224 point-to-point tests, 1,045 meter maintenance projects. So a big thank you to our CAISO inspectors for all the work that you do all over the state of California. We had our Entrust Certificate SSL renewal project in 2024, so we did 639 rig certificate renewals. Our GDSC talk time, we did 10,615 minutes, so it's about 127 hours of time given back to the Gen Desk to focus on the issues that matter. For telemetry issue tracking, we created 2,532 tickets for telemetry tracking and granted 1,610 exemptions. And then for AS certification tests, 322, and then 392 meter exemptions. So there are other metrics that weren't included here, but just wanted to give an idea into all the work that's being done at EDAS, and very proud to share these metrics. So now getting into our EDAS documentation requirements a little bit more detail. So for bucket 1, for the single line, 3-line diagram, the CTs and PTs really have to be correctly labeled. This often comes up during the COC process where, we're matching the MSVS to what we see on the SLD, 3LD, and they need to match each other, and they also need to match the MSVS, right? So if we identify any discrepancies in those forms, that can delay the COC process, which is usually a very time-sensitive period. So, if any changes are made in the project where, those are going to be impacted, we really need that communicated early and, submit those updated documents so that we can avoid any delays during the COC. And just to point out, we do have checklists available for these types of documents, the single line, 3-line, com block, and then rig details form. For the com block, it's really important to identify those source points from where they are sourced at the site. So during the point-to-point test, we often see, maybe during pre-testing, there were some changes that were made to where the source devices are coming from or where the points for those devices are coming from. So we really want those changes communicated early so that we can have that visibility for the point-to-point test so that we're not facing any surprises during the point-to-point or having to submit that com block, after the point-to-point. It just makes it easier for EDAS to have that information early. And then our metering scheme overview, you might be surprised to see this in bucket 1. It's not an official requirement. However, we do want to see this in bucket 1 because this gives us time to plan for any complex testing that we might need to design. And this is required for any complex metering, such as loss schemes, complex netting, and then for any BES site, we need that BES idle bit, and we need to have that detail on the loss of comm when that BES idle source device goes down. We need to have that detail on what happens to that BES idle in the meter. We want that channel 1 data to be zeroed out, right? So that needs to be detailed in the meter scheme overview. And we are kind of requesting that you think about submitting these in bucket 1 because it really gives us the time we need to plan for any complex testing that we might need to design. So for bucket 2, the meter configuration worksheet, just some common issues we've seen in 2024, correct channels, port numbers, multipliers. We often get to the test and then, try to read the meter in, and then there's an issue, right, where maybe the incorrect number of channels are put in, and we need to do something on the fly to update that. So it makes it really easy for us if any changes are made that that updated meter configuration worksheet is submitted to us. Just a note for public IP, if you are using public IP, we have to make a rule on the ISO firewall, and that can add lead time. So just plan for that. If you're using public IP, it does take about 14 extra days to get that implemented on the ISO firewall. For the load standby provider, CAISO can't be your load standby provider, so we've seen that sometimes. Just be sure to double check that field. And then for bucket 3, 24/7 contact form, CPS agreement, external network form. These are all usually pretty straightforward. Sometimes what we do see on the CPS agreement and external network form, which was previously the ECN agreement, you see the entity names not matching what we have in RIMS. Or the addresses, or a signatory who's like an associate or something like that. So just be on the lookout for stuff like that. And then I'll get into, on my next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some of the contact distributions for our non-compliance, kind of related to the 24/7 contact form. And then for bucket 5, the MSVS, for seal numbers, just a reminder here, the seal needs to match who the inspector signatory is. So there's multiple inspectors at the site. Just make sure whoever sealed the meter is also going to be the signatory, because the MSVS will get sent back if those two don't match. The POR calc, this is for situations where you might have a distance greater than half a mile to the POI, or low side metering schemes. This is to be determined by the CAISO inspector whether this is required. But this is processed in bucket 5. Just work with your CAISO inspector on when this is going to be required. They're going to be ultimately deciding where this is going to be important. And then our meter exemption in bucket 5, this is distinct from meter non-compliance issue. This is a meter exemption from the CAISO tariff. The CAISO tariff specifies that the CAISO meter shall not have any external inputs. So this meter exemption is basically saying that for situations where we have netting, loss schemes, or BES idle, that it's allowing those external inputs. So we do need that detail in the meter exemption in bucket 5 for any of types of these situations. So our contact forms, I know there's some big ambiguity sometimes on the different types of notifications that we have and the different types of contacts that are pulled in. And this is not an all-inclusive list of all the different EDAS notifications. I could probably do a whole presentation on all of the different EDAS notifications that are sent out, right? But these are the two main ones that you're going to see post-COD, right? So our metering non-com, those are going to pull in all the SC contacts. So those four, the primary alternate, metering, and then metering alternate, in addition to the regulatory contracts, so the MSA, PGA contacts, and then the meter contacts that are submitted to EDAS with the metering contact form. And the metering contact form isn't a requirement in the NRI process, but just know that you can submit that metering contact form if there are additional contacts that you want on those metering non-com notifications. And then just a note for our SC contacts, those are actually managed by our SC requests team. So we've been trying to pull in SC requests when there's contact updates needed at the SC level. And then our MSA PGA contacts are managed by our regulatory contracts team. And then for telemetry non-compliance, a little different here. So those are only going to be sent to the RT 24-hour contacts, primary alternate. So those contacts that are submitted in the 24/7 contact form, and then our SC contacts, but not including the metering contacts. So just the primary and primary alternate. So now a question here, raise your hand if you've been part of a point-to-point test that didn't go exactly as planned. Kind of what I was expecting, right? So I'm excited to announce that we've updated our point-to-point procedure. It will be available later today. We submitted the web request this morning. We've gone into a lot more detail in the specific test requirements of what we've been seeing lately. We've gotten a lot of feedback from our generation operators and grid ops managers about things that they want to see for sites that go sync. And we see this pretty visibly on our GDSC shifts, right? So we're working closely with our gen operators, and they're communicating these issues to us, and we're going to be reviewing this procedure periodically so that we can make sure all that feedback from our generation team is going into this procedure so that you guys have the visibility you need to communicate this to the resource owners and get all this completed in a way that's very clear and clears up some of the confusion that may have been arisen during the point-to-point testing. So some important topics for pre-testing, ComCheck. We really want to encourage and require that pre-testing. We want to encourage a DNP3 master emulator so that you can really simulate the CAISO rig communication so that there's very little ambiguity and less surprises during the actual point-to-point test. For the ComCheck, we just request that you give us 5 days in advance of your point-to-point appointment, and that would be 5 business days, right? So that we have time to review the telemetry and meters, activate the certificates on the rig, and then have time to plan for that actual point-to-point test date. We go into greater detail about the source device requirements, and that would be for both value and quality, right? So we look at specifically what types of devices are going to require test kit testing, and that would be for situations where we have our megawatt, megavar analogs, and then our discrete points like circuit breakers. Basically, anything that's coming from a relay or breaker, we want to test that from the source. We want to test that as realistic as a scenario that we could, because that's going to ultimately make sure that when this resource goes sync, that there's no surprises. Sometimes we've seen, like for a resource where this wasn't tested correctly, they go sync, and then the megawatt, megavar points are reverse polarity, and the generation operators are on our GDSC line, like asking us what's going on, right? So this will really help clear out some of that ambiguity. For AGC set point testing, we want to really encourage that all the devices included in that loop are tested. So what we've seen before is when sites show up for their AS certification test, basically maybe 1 or 2 of the devices in that loop were excluded during the point-to-point test. So we really want to encourage that all those devices are ready to test at the point-to-point. And we want your feedback on this because this will really help clear up the AS testing when you go to do your certification, it'll make sure that there's very few issues when we're actually doing that certification. And then for our communication polls, we go into greater detail about why it's important to actually disconnect the source device at the source. Sometimes we get questions like, oh, well, why can't we just disable a port and simulate this? And it's really important to actually disconnect it at the source. For example, like a MET station, where maybe that MET station is communicating to a data aggregator over Modbus. We want to make sure that that logic is in place to communicate the quality changes into DNP3 protocol from Modbus, so that we're actually getting the correct visibility on that. So the correct way to test that in this example would be to actually like power off the MET station and make sure that that Modbus logic is set up. Yeah, this is just like a little sample of it. We go into a lot greater detail, specific analogs, digitals, calculations. And then, yeah, like I said, that procedure will be available hopefully end of today. So yeah, definitely go review it. I'm gonna try to add the links to this PowerPoint and then re-upload it so that you can just access this PowerPoint and access those new procedures. And they should be available on our website as well. Just, you know, that'll help you get exactly where you need to go if you use the PowerPoint here. So another question, raise your hand if you have passed the NRI 72-hour test on the first try. So I had one a couple weeks ago, just one, and then maybe there was one other one like last year or something. It's not super common, but it is possible, and we want to make this easier. And so that's why we've actually created a new, and very excited to announce this, we've created a new 72-hour test procedure. And this goes into very great detail at a point-to-point level on the stuff that we're checking for, and the reason that it's important that we're checking these things. So some important topics that we cover, we're looking at performance validation in real-world conditions. So we're really testing the resource for how it's going to operate in the market. We need that 72 hours clean telemetry to build that operator trust. We don't want operators to have any confusion once this resource goes commercial about why there's telemetry issues or anything like that. We go into the difference between like a DNP3 quality versus operational data issue. So for example, for DNP3 quality, if you have a dropout in your quality, that is not tied to an explained like fieldwork appointment or, ongoing maintenance at the site that was communicated to EDAS in advance, that's essentially going to reset your 72-hour clock, right? So, but in contrast to that, if we have operational data issue, for example, SOC exceeding max energy or UPMW exceeding HSL megawatt for a solar site, we really just need to see some updated runtime that proves that that issue is resolved. So some important distinctions there, and it's laid out all in great detail in the procedure. But yeah, just want to point out there the difference between like a quality event versus an issue with the operational logic. Please notify EDAS if you have any planned work during the 72-hour test. If we don't get that notification, we can't really exempt you from the review period where we see a quality dropout, and then after the fact it's like, oh yeah, we were doing a rig update. Well, it's like we really need that communicated in advance. If there's an OMS number, provide that to us. Let us know which points are going to drop out. That'll really help us plan, and we can exempt those from the review period if they're communicated to us in advance. So just a reminder there. Andrew already said it, but 10 days business processing time is basically our norm for right now. And if you do need extra attention on your project, you can coordinate with us. We'll do our best to accommodate your project. Just always reach out to us. We'll always try to assess that. You can work with us and the NRI team to get your project across the line. Yeah, definitely excited to share that new procedure. Please check it out. It should be available by the end of today. So just some notes here on our latest BPM iteration. We updated some of our critical points. So all these highlighted in yellow here are going to be now required to be covered by exemption if they are reporting bad telemetry. So that would include our unit gross megawatt, net megawatt, and auxiliary megawatt for all resources that have those points. And then battery specific, we have SOC max energy. And then for any providing regulation, we have the low and high operating limits and then our AGC point. So keep an eye on this. Go review our BPM section 8.4. These are all required to be covered by exemption now, so definitely be tracking this. And then an update here on our exemption timelines. So initial exemptions are going to be granted in good faith, assuming that we have all the information we need. But for extensions that are going to go longer than a month or something like that, we'd really want to have a detailed description of what's going on to fix the issue. So that can include an expected resolution date, purchase orders for the parts, signed agreements with contractors, service tickets with communication service providers. And then a note here for extended generation outages for situations where, there's been a catastrophic failure or something like that and the unit is truly just out of service. you can work with EDAS and we'll work with you to assess those situations on a case-by-case basis. And a note that exemptions beyond 90 days will require a phone call discussion with the resource owner, scheduling coordinator, and any involved consultants. And another reminder here, when you're submitting those exemption renewals, keep that existing description. We want to have the history within the exemption so that we can kind of have that all in one place. Don't create a new exemption description, just append it to the existing record so it's all kind of kept together in one place. So to recap, I gave an overview of the EDAS team, talked about some of our EDAS metrics, went into our tasks at a high level. We looked at some of our EDAS documents and went into a little bit of more detail on, the trends that we were seeing in the past year or so. We announced our new point-to-point test updated procedure, talked about the brand new NRI 72-hour test procedure, and then gave some telemetry noncompliance exemption updates. And just a note here, and Kelsey will be talking about this in great detail after me, but the pre-COD ADS testing 5320B procedure is available. We've been running some pilot tests. Excited to see what's going to come for that, but more to come. So now some discussion ideas. So I'm going to get you all to say something. And these are just some prompts. So, feel free to share whatever discussion ideas that you can think of. But I want to open the floor to anybody who might want to share any improvements to our EDAS metering telemetry standards. If you could give advice to new project teams going through EDAS requirements for the first time, what would you tell them? And then, if anybody could share when a 72-hour test went flawlessly, what made that successful? So I'll get us started. So for that 72-hour, for that last question, the 72-hour test going flawlessly, I don't actually have visibility into what was going on the resource side, right? But ultimately, it was just a few weeks ago. And then, I've seen other situations where it happens, and it's not very common. But what I do see is, when we go to review it, everything's in there, right? There's no confusion. All of the expected parameters are reporting the way they should. We don't see any quality dropouts. We don't see any issues with the operational logic. There's sufficient runtime, stuff like that. So I'm curious on that one, if anybody can share. I know nobody raised their hand, right? But maybe not flawlessly, but if you've seen success during the 72-hour test, what was something that made that successful, right?
This is Dan Brockhouse from Charmark Associates. So to your question, this is years ago, and this is when we actually requested data in advance of when you would do the 72-hour for the completion. And I think this is something that EDAS could probably get back to, or at least make available to resource owners again, some level of data in advance of that 72-hour. Provide the data once the site becomes live. We can start looking at the data, assess it the way you would, and then make the request knowing that it's good. You only have to verify that we've already loaded. So that was many years ago. So.
Definitely. Yeah, you can always do a courtesy request prior to the 72-hour test starting. These are processed in the order they're received, right? But if there is a site that's maybe on a strict timeline, you can reach out to us prior to the actual COD request and request that courtesy check. We have been providing those. So, please do reach out if you're on a strict timeline. If you need initial attention on that, we're happy to support that.
Sorry, to expand on that a little bit, are you guys considering making that data exposed, at least during the testing period, so we can just naturally get it without having to ask?
I know that was discussed at, previously, but maybe Kelsey can chime in a little bit here.
Yeah, it's actually been a multi-year effort. That's been a little more challenging, largely because of the access, just making sure that the access is available to you for your specific resource. and not spread out. So we've looked at a few different frameworks. We've done a few demos that didn't go as we expected. And so it's still definitely high on the priority list to see that project through. It would be huge workload cut for us, if we could not have to let all the time. And it would really help our operators. It would be big long-term benefits, and it does have a lot of attention, and we don't have a solution now, but we are still trying for that.
Yeah, that would be a great improvement to have that visibility. Anybody else want to share anything on the 72-hour test? Sure, Patrick.
Yeah, once upon a time, it was kind of common to pass a 72-hour test on the first try, but I think I was just going to use this opportunity to point out that once upon a time, we had a lot less co-located resources. We had a lot less building it while it's flying, to Andrew's point, like actual construction ready versus trying to meet a contract timeline. And it seems like there was a lot less interface with devices on site which are tuned during the test energy phase of the project. So for example, the PPC, they have to tune it to its application, and that's going to cause updates, which is going to cause dropouts in telemetry, right? So it's kind of naturally part of the process now to have some of those local intermittencies just as part of getting a site ready to go commercial that weren't existent some years ago. So, but yeah, back in 2016, sure, a bunch of times. 1 megawatt solar with, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The sites are getting more and more complex, right? And things are getting more and more challenging for our operators. So they're communicating a lot of these new requirements to us and things that they want to see. So, so yeah, definitely excited about that 72-hour procedure. It really gets into the nitty-gritty on a lot of these requirements that we've been communicating out during the 72-hour test. Okay, so let's go now from the top. So if you could give advice to a new project team going through EDAS requirements, the EDAS NRI process, anything like that, for the first time, what would you tell them?
Start 6 months earlier than you thought you were going to start.
It's key, right? So planning far ahead in advance, definitely.
Yeah, and this gets into some of the things that Andrew mentioned, right? About maybe some unforeseen, updates that you need to make, but also, just speaking to like metering and telemetry perspective, like getting revisions on documents that they thought were complete. That's can be a 2 to 3 week turnaround time when they're, half the time they come to us, they're already think they're ready to submit into bucket 1 and they're just not there. So yeah, start way earlier than you thought.
Definitely. Thanks, Patrick. Any other contributors for this question? This is your chance to give EDAS the feedback that you've been waiting to give them. Maybe that second one, looking ahead, what improvements overall would you like to see in telemetry metering standards? Open floor.
Hi, this is Casey from GridsMe. I think I would like more explicit language in the BPM for metering. Earlier you talked about the half-mile standard and leaving it up to the inspector, but that standard did not emerge from inspectors, it emerged from EDAS. Defining a parameter which might observe that threshold. Is it a kilowatt threshold that is, so resultant of an R value that you calculated, okay, now we need to consider the losses, or is it the actual distance threshold? And if it is a distance threshold that is up to the inspector, then is it more that it's a distance times or distance and kilovolt consideration, right? Because a half mile at 500 kV is not a half mile at 12 kV, right? So having just an explicit standard would help a lot of client conversations that we have, would help a lot of inspectors do that calculation and be able to demand and uphold the standards expected by the CAISO.
Definitely. Thanks for bringing that up. I was hoping you'd bring that up because we talked about that at RE+. So yeah, definitely. We love that feedback. I'm seeing Priyanka taking notes over here. So thanks, Casey, for that feedback. Any other feedback for EDAS?
If I can expand on the standards for the, I also would like EDAS to take another look at the 0.3% accuracy for CTs. I think it needs to be more explicitly defined because 0.3% accuracy for a CT that's oversized times 10 still meets the CAISO standard. And I'm having a hard time telling clients that they're way outside of their accuracy specification because I can't point to a standard that enforces that. Further, multi-fuel resources like solar and BESS have a number of conditions that are near net zero, BESS idle, nighttime, very, very small loads. The 0.3% accuracy of a CT cannot measure light loads like that. You would at least need a special range, extended range, 0.15% accuracy to cover something that's going to have only a couple of amps output. So otherwise, these CTs are acting outside of what they're designed to do to try to produce a revenue grade result.
Absolutely. Thanks, Casey. Cool. Do we have any questions in the chat?
We do. We have a hand from Justin Stevenson on the WebEx. Let's go to Justin.
Justin Stevenson with Trimark. Hey, a couple asks. When you guys send out the telemetry check emails and there's multiple points pointing to failure, the graphs are obviously very hard to interpret to a lot of people because of how busy they can be. Do you guys have any plans to actually send maybe the raw data with it that you can open and kind of dive in and see it at a more granular level?
Yeah, absolutely. You can always request that data from us. That is available to us and it's available to you as well. We can export that PI data into the raw data for you to have a lot more granularity. So please do request that if that's valuable to you. We want the information that we're conveying to you during the 72-hour test to be as helpful as possible. If those pie charts aren't as helpful as that CSV data, we're happy to provide that CSV data for you to review.
Okay. And the other question I had was regarding MSVS checks in general. I've had a few projects where I submit 4 versions of an MSVS and then an issue is only flagged during the COD approval process, but not in bucket 5 when those MSVSs were submitted. So is there any plan in the future to kind of actually do a full check of those MSVSs in bucket 5 prior to COD? Because as you know, when an MSVS gets rejected during the COD approval process, everyone, gets flustered and timelines are already crunched and it just becomes a headache. So just curious if there's any plan to actually fully review those and catch these errors in a single pass versus, 2 or 3 passes at different times.
Sure. And are you talking about a situation where like the MSVS was approved in bucket 5, but then there's a rejection during the COD process?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, maybe Priyanka, would you be able to take that one?
Hey, Justin. Yeah, so we do review MSVS completely, but after the MSVS review, when we go through the certificate of compliance process, we review multiple documents together, like the POR calc, metering scheme overview, and we do the data validation. So sometimes during the data validation process, we may see some issues, which then we'll look into MSVS and could be some incomplete or wrong information provided on the MSVS. So in those cases is where we reject an MSVS during the COC or COD process. But we are also working on process improvements on our side where we try to catch them ahead of time from these learning experiences and help you in the earlier stages to correct that information. That way, it does not cause additional workaround time for both EDAS and also for the meter inspection company or the generator owner.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, some of my rejections were due to like errors in notes being identified during the COD approval process, but not during the bucket 5 submittal, not so much the meat and potatoes of the document, but any help there to kind of point these things out ahead of time is greatly appreciated. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Any other questions in the chat?
We have no other questions online.
Okay. Any other questions for those here in person? Go ahead, Pat.
I have a poor old horse that I'm going to continue to thump on, but insofar as I've shopped this amongst the inspector community, it would be very nice to be able to submit documents that we are the signatory on and responsible for directly, and have maybe a bit more of a direct portal to make communications with the EDAS team. Because, you know, from my view, I hand off an MSVS that's complete. It might live with the project owners for 2 months before they submit it, and I have, you know, you can expect my level of trust in some of these project managers. So it creates a lot of concern and re-review. And yeah, I think they would just be more efficient to be able to have a direct line of communication. And then, yeah, just to double down on Casey's point, that some of the business practice manual specifications and requirements for metering, while the specifications are explicit, technically speaking, they're very application dependent, such as the CT application sizing and stuff. So yeah, some specificity around applications would be a process improvement opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay. Any final questions? Last chance. Okay. So just some helpful links here. This presentation will become available later today. I'm going to add the new procedures to this presentation. So you should be able to access those new procedures for 72-hour tests and point-to-point testing. But these are just also some helpful links. Please use them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. We are going to take a 10-minute break before we dive into our next presentation. We're going to take about another 1 or 2 minutes, and we're adding one more slide. Okay. Are you online seeing the CAISO Tariff Appendix DD Section 13.3.1?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to hand it over to Andrew Brown to share the information on this slide.
All right. So one item that we forgot to add to the presentation previously, thanks Christina for reminding us. On December 17th, 2024, the CAISO tariff was amended to include deposits required for certain interconnection activities related to the implementation of resources into the CAISO markets. So for three-party LGIAs, they would have a $35,000 deposit that is due at the time that the LGIA is executed. So that's for any LGIA after December 17th. And that deposit covers the queue management and the NRI activities. It does not include any MMA or LOS study deposits. And the deposit is refundable for any amount that's not used, or if the project withdraws from the process, you would be defunded or refunded whatever deposit balance was left after the true up of the account. For two-party projects, it's effective for all projects regardless of the execution date of the LGIA. So when you start that NRI process with the two-party LGIA, you would be responsible for a $6,000 deposit that would be due at the time the NRI project is created. Once you've created the NRI project, all two-party projects are sent an email that has a deposit form, and then it would also have the banking information along with that to be sent into the CAISO. So that deposit is just for NRI activities because Q Management doesn't manage two-party projects, so it would just cover the NRI activities related to implementation into the CAISO markets. And that also doesn't cover if you have any MMA or LOS study requirements. That would not cover that. So one thing I do want to clarify when I talk about NRI activities, that covers like all of the modeling that would be necessary, regulatory contracts, our EDAS groups, grid assets, all of those different activities are tracked for this as a way to make sure that the cost recovery is accurate for resources coming into the market. So, and that is in the CAISO tariff appendix DD section 13.3.1. If you wanted to review that in more detail. Are there any questions on this? All right.
There's no questions at this time, Andrew. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are going to switch over. Oh, perfect. We are going to switch over to the resource.
All right, perfect. Thought I put Drew's name on here too, but that's okay. All right, so you've heard quite a bit of stressing from us today about ensuring, that we get these resources onboarded in a reliable manner so they're ready to respond. Just the growing number of resources we've had, and then just the tight timelines that you all have been under, we all have been under, has resulted in quite a few, issues we've seen in the control room and quite a bit of manual action that we've been having to take. So we wanted to really focus on that for this presentation on resource performance in general, and then review a few of the processes that we're trying to outline to help with some of those issues. Whoops. It missed a couple slides. I don't know. Oh, okay, good. All right, so just a few housekeeping reminders. You guys know the drill by now. Please keep the lines muted. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll be sure to get to it. All right. Okay, so objectives of this presentation. We have Drew here, who is one of our grid operations manager in the control room, has the most recent up-to-date resource operator issues that we're experiencing in the control room. So he's going to review a few of the operational challenges that we've been seeing. And then I'm going to run through this new process that we have for pre-COD resource performance issues, and kind of what you should expect from your end if one of the resources that you're working with happens to have one of these issues occur with them. And then we're also going to talk about this 5320B pilot testing program that we have going for resources to hopefully work through some of their pre-commercial challenges prior to going commercial. So with that, I will pass it over to Drew.
All right. Thank you, Kelsey. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy, I think, day 2 for you here. So we're going to talk today about some of the operational challenges during pre-COD horizon. Does anybody know kind of what are the 2 leading fuel type resources that are coming on to the California BA as of late? If you get it right, you don't have to be here the rest of the day. So anybody know?
Solar and BESS?
Solar and BESS. Yeah, solar and BESS. So what we refer to those two is IBRs, inverter-based resources. They are very, as far as the BESS side, they are extremely fast. So they also have some of their challenges. I think what we're finding the most in implementing a lot of these resources is the lack of understanding of how the controls work. So we'll talk about some of those. So we just talked about the growing number of new resources on the fleet. I think to date right now, we got 22,000 megawatts of solar, 14,000 megawatts of BESS. So that BESS number was 0 5 years ago. So we've brought on 14,000 megawatts of batteries in the last 5 years. So extremely fast. We are, I say, in the US, probably the fastest paced onboarder of those resources. The Desert Southwest is bringing some on, but a lot of the ISOs that we talk with in WEC, it's like they're talking about their first battery, and we're like, wait, we remember when we had our first battery. So we're just moving really, really quickly. So what happens is those really require us to do a lot of manual monitoring. Because we talked about how fast the batteries are, and we have to take manual corrective action. And kind of what we'll talk about today is some of the issues that we see when we talk to you as a scheduling coordinator and the grid, the generation owner, some of the challenges we face. So last year we talked, and really it was just kind of going over like the OMS submission, the testing process. So we highlighted that last year. So just to kind of talk a little bit more about some other items is kind of the communication. So during testing, we initiate communications with the SC, the scheduling coordinator. We know that you're probably also talking to the site. You may be talking to a metering side. You may be talking to a control side. We understand that there's a lot of probably communication going on the onboarding process, but really just to really clear the air, CAISO as the grid operator, we really just reference and talk to the scheduling coordinator. We don't talk to the actual generator owner. We don't talk to people on site. We talk with you as the scheduling coordinator. So just want to emphasize that. We've had it where we call the SC and they're like, hey, let me just forward you over to my SCADA tech. And the SCADA tech comes on and he's like, oh yeah, I'm at the airport right now. We're like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, we will talk to you as a scheduling coordinator, and we assume that you're making all the necessary communication to the site and all those other necessary parties. Any questions with that? All right, so
yes, we do have a question. Mike Whitney, let's go ahead.
Mike, if you're talking, I'm not able to hear you, sir.
Stacy, can you unmute Mike, please? Stacy, the event producer, are you able to unmute Mike Whitney? Okay, I'm sorry. We'll come back to Mike.
All right. So the second bullet here, coordinate any changes to the approved test plan with CAISO. So help me remember, where do we submit our test plans? Is that via email, through ChatGPT, via cloud, OMS? Does anybody kind of an idea of what that portal or that medium is? Oh, you guys are a quiet bunch today. Wow. OMS. So OMS is where we review, we start those reviews in the D2 horizon in real time. Our planning horizon, they start looking at these at D+7. D+4, our real-time OE start to evaluate, and then D2 to D1, our real-time operators start to review. So oftentimes, sometimes what we see is an OMS will be submitted in the D2, but there's no test plan. And we call and say, hey, we see there's a card out there for D2. You guys are going to start testing. However, we don't have any information on hour ending or dates in which you switch to test. And they're like, oh yeah, but if I submitted the test card, it's like, well, yeah, okay, you get a B-. Now we need to get an A+. So you need to have all the pertinent data, basically those test plans, what the megawatt values are, so we can start doing those tests. So if you get a call in the D2 horizon, that's pretty much what we're calling about, is we see that there's some discrepancy in your OMS card as far as your test plan. Then when we roll into real time, often what could happen as well is say you got 100 megawatts for ironing 13. And then we look over and we're like, well, okay, they're up at 500. Okay, we look at their OMS, oh no, they said it was going to be 100. So no communication to us, and we call you and say, hey, per your test plan, it was 100 megawatts. You're outside that, you didn't notify us. So in real time, if there is any change to your OMS test plan, our expectation is not only do you update your OMS, but then you also give us a phone call, because obviously we're in that shorter horizon. So always give us a heads up, over communicate. It's always going to be good for you. If you are testing above that 100 megawatts and it's 500 and you're causing a congestion issue, we will terminate that testing until further notice. So don't really want to have to do that for you. We understand you're testing, you want to be getting COD. We want to help facilitate that process. So good communications is key. Telemetry, good quality telemetry. I mean, this should kind of go without mentioning, but it's actually true. So we've had it where resource comes online and says, hey, I want to test. And we're like, hey, we don't see good quality telemetry. They're like, oh, yeah, no, I know, we're working on that, but we want to test. It's like, okay, well, I can't see you. I don't know what's going on with your resource. So that testing could also be denied, rescheduled, or terminated. So it's really imperative that you have that in play, a good quality data. So we have visibility, you have visibility, and we're all on the same page with that. Any questions on that? What we covered so far before we talk about the fun of the control of the resources? Go ahead, sir.
Real quick, this is Dan Brockhouse again from Trimark. For the telemetry, is there specific telemetry that you're looking for good quality? Obviously, there's testing, and you would expect all of it to stay good, but we won't know from the testing period with backfeed where there's MET in the field. Is MET data of value to you during that test period, or is it the meter data, the breaker status, et cetera? What's important versus what's acceptable during the test period?
Yeah, so the BPM for metering kind of highlights those critical points. So there is a list of those critical points in the metering for BPM. For operations, really, it comes down to three main values for but again, you got to look at that full list for sure. But for visibility for us in the control room, good UPMW, UGMW, and a good UCON, either status, open, or close. So those are like the three critical, but there's a list in the BPM metering that talks about all the different items that we would need. So, but yeah, for us, for visibility for an operator, those are the three that we need to see at any given point in time. Great question. So control of the resource, this should go kind of without having to emphasize too much on, but it's actually becoming more of a concern with what we're talking about, the IBRs and inverter-based resources. A lot of these resources are controlled by controllers and computers. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even today with thermal resources, I can call a thermal resource and say, hey, can you take manual control of your resource? And they can. So with these IBRs, with the controllers, with the batteries and the solar sites, what we're finding is when we call you and we want you to take manual action on that resource, there's kind of multiple things that happen there. There's some cases and they're like, well, I actually don't have control of the resource remotely. I'm actually gonna have to send somebody out there. It's gonna be 2 hours until I can get somebody out there. So what we have to do in those situations is go, okay, you're causing a real reliability issue on the system. We start coordinating with the local utilities to look at opening breakers. So you don't want to go to that. We don't want to go to that because we know opening a breaker on a piece of equipment can cause an issue. So but what we're finding is when we call and we try to instruct to take manual action on these resources, it does not seem that the scheduling coordinator or the generator operator has those controls in place to take manual control. Often what we see too, when they go on to regulation, so for batteries, you have the opportunity to get AS certified, providing 2 products, or there's 4 products total, but really 2 products that we have control over, which is regulating units, reg up or reg down. Those go on our automatic generation control system, in which they get a 4-second pulse. Sometimes what we find is when they go on regulation, the batteries look for a specific, the controllers are programmed to look for a specific indicator coming through ADS. If that indicator doesn't come through, the batteries just sit there and won't follow AGC. So we'll reach out to the site and say, hey, can you put your resource on AGC? And they say, we don't know how to do that. Our controller doesn't allow us to do that. So those are just some of the recent kind of things that we've seen. Obviously, what will occur is we will pull you out of the regulation market for that period of time because you're not actually be able to provide that product. And then we'll do outreach with you to figure out, okay, why wasn't the controller activating when it should have been activating? So that's kind of how we'll have to do that. But I think the goal for this presentation and for this whole process this week is to really get you be aware of some of the issues that are coming up, and then maybe take those corrective actions as you start to develop these sites. Any questions on controllers? Okay, ramp rates. So this one's has come up quite a bit. So for batteries, we actually have, again, 14,000 megawatts of batteries. The ramp rates on batteries, I mean, you can do instantaneous ramps essentially. So if you're a 500 megawatt BESS, you basically have 1,000 megawatts of capacity. Essentially, if you're at 0, you could go 0 to 500 instantaneously. Is that good for the grid? No. So we've had to do a lot of outreach for those resources to ensure that they linearly ramp, because in reality, you're going to get a 5-minute dispatch. So the rule of thumb is to ensure that your ramp rate matches to that 5-minute dispatch. So under no circumstance should you be doing instantaneous full charge to discharge. Is it cool? Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty remarkable you can move that fast, but it's going to cause a system issue on the system. And the reality of it is we've actually had some WEC-wide disturbances in which the batteries move so fast that our AGC reacts to it, and then other BAs AGC also reacts to it because the tie flows move. So essentially the whole interconnection starts to shake together. Do you want to be the battery that does that? No, you don't. You don't want to be the battery that caused the whole system. So ensure that you have those ramp rates defined and ensure that you're doing that 5-minute ramp rate rather than an instantaneous ramp. Any questions on that?
Just maybe one thing to add for the ramping is that, I think it makes sense when the ramping is easier to understand when you're receiving dispatches and you have a 5-minute dispatch, go from this to this, and it seems like starting to get dialed in for that somewhat. But during the testing phase, when you're not receiving dots, we see a lot of comments, well, I told you I was going to 50 at the top of the hour. And it's like, okay, we can't just start up and go to 50. We expect the Pmax minus Pmin divided by 5 minutes, even though you're not receiving 5-minute dispatches during the testing period. So just something to kind of acknowledge is that whether you're receiving dots or not, we still want to see that ramp over a 5-minute period.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So practice that 5-minute ramp in your pre-COD, regardless of the DOT. Start to build that into your controller right off the bat to do that 5-minute ramp. And as Kelsey pointed out, oftentimes what we'll see too is, say that 100 megawatt BESS example that Kelsey has pointed out, plus or minus 100 megawatts. You got negative 200, negative 100, positive 100. You got 200 megawatt delta there. Sometimes what we'll see is they'll say, okay, I'm going to charge negative 100 and the top of the hour I'm going to go to 100. And as Kelsey pointed out, sometimes they'll just switch 200 megawatts right at the top of the hour. So that can cause an issue. So please, when those types of changes, notify the desk, let them know that you're going to be switching from full discharge to charge. So whenever you do that full capacity change, always notify the generation dispatcher for those. But please do that 5-minute ramp as soon as you can get that into your controller. That's ideal. So communications for reliability. So if there is a issue with transmission capacity in which your system's connected to, we may need to do a reschedule. So we do real-time analysis to figure out, okay, is this testing contributing to real-time congestion? If it's a yes, then test energy is like the first to get rescheduled. So there could be instances in which we call you and need to reschedule your test energy or cancel your test energy based on transmission capacity on the system. So oftentimes we've gotten that where the SC is like, well, you need to tell me exactly what's happening on a transmission system. Obviously, we can't do that. We can tell you that there is a reliability concern or that there is congestion in the area, but that is the most information that we will provide you. Obviously, our goal, again, is to get you COD, because once you're COD, you're participating in the market, you're getting a dispatch. We want that. We want to get you to that point. But to get you to that point, we also need that coordination, communication, and good overall general practices there. Any questions on that piece before we get to the last item here? So the last item here, an operating instruction. So this is a NERC-defined term. So an operating instruction is essentially, it's the holy grail of terms in grid ops. So as soon as you get an operating instruction, basically you have to follow it unless that instruction causes a severe safety issue, equipment damage, or something of that sort. But other than that, it really needs to be followed. So we've had to provide operating instructions. So say we call your solar site that's testing, they're causing a reliability problem during testing. We call you and say, hey, we need to bring this resource offline immediately. And this has happened where then we get well, I'm not going to be able to get my resource off for 2 hours. I got to send somebody out there. So we say, well, we have a real concern right now. I need that resource off within 10 minutes or further specified by a different time. So I give that resource an operating instruction, need to be off in 10 minutes. And it's actually pretty remarkable. Usually that site comes off in 10 minutes after they just told me it's going to take 2 hours. So those instructions need to be followed. If those instructions are not followed, we report these, we log these up. These are also referred over to DMM, which none of you want to have experience or exposure to them. They will do reviews. I mean, it opens up NERC compliance concerns. So you don't want to be in that situation. So if you do get an operating instruction, you do need to use 3-part with us. If you don't use 3-part, we will request that. That is another NERC standard in which for COM, we have to do 3-part communication. So please, 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 those operating instructions are not a suggestion. They are an instruction, and those need to be followed within that 10-minute time period, or if we specify a different time. Any question on that? And again, you must have control of the resource at all times. That's, I think, what we're trying to get at too, is a lot of these batteries in solar sites, they are computer controlled. There are control systems that are potentially outside of your direct control. You as a scheduling coordinator may need to call somebody else, but our expectation is if needed, you can take manual control of the resource. It's not just like, hey, it's following its DOT, everything's good. Well, if we need to change your DOT or have you come offline, we expect that be followed, and you have the means to do that. I feel like a dad just up here scolding you guys. Is there any questions? In my trainings with operators, I do a lot of dad jokes, so I'll spare you guys with those. So some of the common resource performance process issues as of late. So I just kind of wanted to give you a highlight, a little ESPN, this is what's happening on the system today. So a lot of what we're seeing is not following test schedules or dispatch instructions. So basically just doing what the site wants to do and not reflecting on the test schedule. Sometimes what happens is the site doesn't call the scheduling coordinator and let them know, hey, we're deviating from the test plan. So sometimes you guys, as a scheduling coordinators, are caught off guard. We call you and you're like, yeah, let me call them. I don't know what they're doing. And so sometimes it's just getting on the same page. So ensure that you have the procedures and protocols in play. And that's kind of what we find too when we deviate from those test schedules and we tell you to come offline. and then we kind of put you in the penalty box, and Kelsey will talk about what that penalty box looks like. It's not a fun place. But then when we kind of meet with you, talk with you, a lot of what we find is there's just not a good communication protocol between the various parties. So they were like, okay, yeah, we got to revise our procedure. Someone made this decision on site to test outside this, but we didn't notify, party A, B, and C. So party C is the one who's supposed to report to you. It's like, okay. So a lot of times it's just cleaning up those communication protocols during testing. So we know you guys want to follow dispatch instructions, follow those test schedules, but sometimes there's that communication that just gets messed up there. Oscillations. This is the scary one. This is the one that we've had a few instances of. We actually had a few instances of this last week, one of which was recognized in WEC. So something that we don't want to have overall. So making sure that you have good visibility of this. One of our oscillations that we had a few years ago in the pre-COD horizon, there was actually folks on site doing a reboot to some of the SCADA box basically on the site. So they thought they were just doing a system reboot, and when they did that reboot, for whatever reason, it sent the controller to gyrate the megawatt output of the resource. That was felt all across WEC. We called the site, said, hey, you need to come offline. You just oscillated. And they said, no, we just, that wasn't real telemetry. We're like, oh, no, it was. And so really understanding the work that you're doing on site really could impact, both. And the two big things we're looking for, obviously, is your MVAR and your megawatt output. So making sure you understand what kind of actions you're taking on site that could potentially impact those two items. You do not want to be causing an oscillation. If you do cause an oscillation, you will be put in the penalty box. We will want to do data requests. You'll want to understand kind of what happened with your resource. You'll be wanting to contact the site owner, and there's going to be a lot of coordination there to ensure that that doesn't happen again, and we get to the root cause of that. So that's not a fun occurrence overall. And then last but not least, we've touched on this a little bit already, is this not ramping. So ensuring that you're ramping to that 5-minute dispatch, because that's what you'll be receiving when you go COD. So making sure that you have that already in your control system and set up. Any other questions for me? All right, just to emphasize, Kelsey and us, we've had the pleasure. It was actually a large-scale battery that came on a few months back. They actually engaged with us prior to them coming on and actually syncing and actually making sure they had the same understandings as us. We got together and talked about an acceptable ramp rate. So you can take that opportunity too if we're learning this together. So if there's something that you just want to confirm with us to make sure we're doing it all together reliably, please do so, and please reach out to us, and we can have those conversations and make sure that we're all on the same page. So we appreciate it. And I'll pass it over to Kelsey. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Drew. A lot of good info there. I think one thing that maybe just to stress too that we've been noticing or hearing when we have a pre-COD resource performance process. We also have a post-COD resource performance process. And one of the things that we've been hearing a lot in the post-COD performance processes is around oh, well, the commissioning team knew how to do XYZ, but maybe that information wasn't passed along to the production related team. So just anything that can be done for making sure that that information is passed along is something that would be super helpful for all the teams. I do see Jasmine asked a question. I don't know if that was for Drew or for me.
Yeah, the question from Jasmine Pierce was, who do we reach out to have discussion regarding ramping process and agreement?
NRI would be good. NRI@CAISO.com. Yep, we can field it. All right. So one of the items that came up in our survey was talking about the resource performance process that we have started as of last year. And that is just not super clearly defined. And I guess just to kick this off, if you have any kind of documentation type items in which the system is ever changing, and I keep saying that, we are refining our documentation as we get this new technology and new assets on board. So if you find a gap in our documentation that you think doesn't clearly outline a process, please do let our NRI team know, and we can help work to get those procedures and processes updated and the documentation in a better spot to make it easier for folks going forward and hopefully alleviate some questions. Drew really stressed kind of the different types of resource performance problems that we see in the control room from day to day. And so we have worked through a process now to do this penalty box method to make sure that our operators aren't having to manually work with different resources, and those can be handled in the back office so they can focus their eyes on reliability. So basically what's going to happen, let's say a resource isn't following their test schedules that they outlined in the card. The generation dispatcher's caught off guard. You know, they're always balancing load and generation, and all of a sudden they see this huge spike in their ACE. And so now we have this unbalance. And so they're wondering what happened, and they find that a testing resource. We have a really nice display in which we can monitor all the testing resources, since we have less visibility since they're not getting market awards. And so we can hone in really quickly and see, oh, this is what caused that, and open up the test card. Sure enough, it's not clear. And so we didn't make the manual actions that we may have had to prepare for that test energy. So the gen dispatcher will call the SC, tell them to stop testing. And from there, they're going to submit what we call a ticket on our end that starts an internal process in which essentially, I guess one step I missed in there is that they're going to call, see if it can be corrected quickly. Depending on the severity of the issue, they may just request you to come offline immediately. If it's something that could be resolved quickly, they'll wait for that. And then we'll move into this ticket process. So within 2 business days, you should expect an email from our queue management team that's going to cite a training that we'd like you to watch and attend, and I'd encourage everybody to watch it even before hopefully this type of process happens. It's called our Resource Performance Expectations of Dispatch and Operating Instructions. It's available on our CAISO Learning Center. And it goes through a lot of the different resource performance issues that we see. It highlights, expectations for testing and ramping and things like that. And so basically we ask that you complete that training, and then what happens from there is that we'll ask you to send an affidavit saying that, yes, we completed the training, and that comes back to us. And then typically we'll take about 2 business days for our operations team to just make sure that if it's not like a higher issue, for instance, oscillations that requires more of a data request, further investigation, then we'll release the hold and go from there. But unfortunately, it is going to cause a delay to the test. And it's just something that we feel is imperative, just to make sure that with all of the resources testing at one time, that our operators aren't having to manually keep an eye on all these until we're sure that everyone understands the expectations going forward. So that was for a first-time offender. So let's say you go through that, you take the training, and it happens again. So we have what we call a repeat offender process. So same kind of thing. Gen dispatcher detects what's happening. They'll put the resource, ask the resource to come offline and put on hold. For both processes, we do add a note in RIMS just to make sure that all the parties are aware that it's involved, understanding that maybe not all the communications are going out. And also just to make sure that we don't give COD approval until those issues are resolved. So within 2 business days, our customer experience team, so Mark Richardson's team, should be reaching out to arrange a meeting to have more thorough discussions, maybe clarify any questions that you have, try to get a better understanding of what's going on and see if there's anything we can do to help, provide more information on. And so depending on what the outcomes and agreements are in that meeting, maybe you're going to fix a setting on your resource, or maybe there's more data that we requested, something like that. Once all of those things are done and complete, then we will move on to final approval to release. Both, like I said, both processes can take a bit, especially if we're getting into the more thorough details in this repeat offender. It can cause delays. So just something to keep in mind. As much as we can prevent those from happening, the better. All right. Any questions on that process? Okie dokie. Okay, so the pre-commercial performance test pilot, OP5320B. So while back when I came out of the control room, one of the things that I was, very concerned about was just about that we don't really have our eyes on all the performance related metrics before resources go commercial. So a lot of the times these resources will go commercial and may not be able to follow a dispatch, may not have just been able to check a connection to their ADS. We heard from scheduling coordinators that I really wish I could test this prior to going commercial. So we wanted to kind of provide this opportunity to do a test that would allow us to catch issues while the commissioning team is on site there to resolve, and potentially work towards making it a requirement, so that if there are certain developers rushing through the process, we can have a requirement that helps us catch these things prior to going commercial. So key reasons here. So collaboration, we really not, it's not just meant to be a requirement to hold things up. We wanted to allow an opportunity to work through your concerns, your questions, more earlier on, try to detect if there's, a model issue. Maybe you don't have access to an application. Maybe you don't see data coming through an application. Do those kind of checks proactively, so it's not causing delays downstream, holding up your COD, or even afterwards, and cause compliance related concerns. We wanted this ability to validate the resource's readiness, make sure that they do have the ability to follow an ADS dispatch, scheduling coordinator to see it, make sure they understand the full OMS submission accuracy, give a little extra eyes on those test cards, and communications, I guess, just in general. And then just overall ensuring grid stability. So we just want to make sure that these resources do respond, they understand the ramping characteristics and things like that. So our Jeff McDonald, one of our EDAS team members, ex-former Gen dispatcher, made this really nice procedure for us that kind of details out the types of checks we want to do. So we'll walk through some of that. So as a reminder, this is a pilot test. We're still working through kinks with it. Admittedly, we got to run through our first few within the last month and ran into some issues. So we are still working through the kinks of it. I don't think the procedural will change much from what we're going to talk about today, but we have kind of put it on hold for a few weeks while we determine some issues with how the dispatches are going out for pre-commercial resources. Typically, we don't send those pre-commercial resources EDs, so there's some challenges there. But basically the process, how it's going to work is we're going to have our ops readiness pre-check. So EDAS is going to perform a pre-check prior to the test so that the test goes smooth and used effectively. So things that we're making sure, is the resource sync approved? Is there any active resource performance issues going on? Is the telemetry stable? We're not necessarily asking for 72 hours of good data, but is it stable enough to facilitate this type of a test? EMS model visibility. So we'll do some checks, make sure that our operators' displays are working, are linking correctly, making sure that they can see the resource when this test is being performed. And then, also just making sure that there's proper outage card access, so that you're able to submit those cards. So from there, hitting on that collaboration piece, this is a new test. We understand there's a lot of questions about it, not a lot of, it is new experiences with it. So for now, at least, we're going to be having a pre-check call where we call up, make sure that it's thoroughly understood what the test is going to be, double check that you see, your ADS has full access. Maybe we're going to talk a few of the different columns. We make sure you have your follow OI dot, make sure you see your SUPs so that certain signals will trigger your resource to move certain ways. So we're going to run through all of that with you, check out the card with you, make sure that, any outstanding questions you have, we can figure out before we actually get into the test. So really meant to be more collaboration so that we can work out some of those kinks. So once we get to the actual test, so, we already went through the ops readiness pre-check. We had a call about it. What's going to happen is we're going to send the resource 6 5-minute DOTs. We've kind of defined ranges in which we plan to do percentage-wise so that we can see, if it's a battery, discharge and charge, up, down, move around. And we'll, for Ver resources, we'll send that follow dot flag so to make sure that it properly responds there. And so that there's some, overall just variability. So we're checking all the ends of it. We will be expecting from the EDAS side for the resource under the test to respond to these dispatches as promptly as possible. And the total test duration will be about 30 minutes. So here are kind of the key stakeholders involved. It'll be our CAISO EDAS test administrator. So they're going to be involved with the pre-check. They're going to hold the tailgate. They're going to be creating and initiating the dispatches. And they'll review the test results and provide those results to your team. Scheduling coordinator is going to be managing the outage cards, ensuring resource availability, handling the communications with our team, and verifying that those dispatch instructions and all the communications necessary with CAISO are happening. And then lastly, our resource owner and operator and commissioning team will be ensuring the resource is technically prepared for the test and is able to respond to those dispatches and provide the data as necessary. So our customer experience team, Andrew kind of stressed it earlier, but highly encourage you guys to take advantage of some of the resources. We've had a few really awesome customer experience folks take some different spins on how we do our training in CBTs. So another plug of if there's a specific thing you want to see a CBT on, let us know. That's something that we can incorporate in and get some clarity around. So they did prepare this nice guide for us, which can be found on the new resource implementation page on the CAISO website. And it kind of walks through the details of this test and give some more clarity around it so that if you have any questions, we can go through it. So next step, so this test is currently in a voluntary pilot program, so anyone can write nri@caiso.com and ask to do the test. Like I said, we've been on hold for a few weeks to try to work through some kinks, but we do plan to start it back up and would encourage you guys to be involved. The long-term goal is to make this a new requirement for all new resources coming through, that they're able to follow dispatches. But we want to make sure that it's fully vetted, it's understood amongst the community, everyone has time to give feedback, and then just that we evaluate, the worth and how it's going. So that is that. And like I said, there is a procedure posted on the website, and then more training material can be found within the CAISO website. All right, so any questions, I guess, on the pre-COD pilot test program before we get into our closing remarks? Yeah, go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, this is Christian with Artisan Grid Services. So I know this is specific to ADS. is there a plan to incorporate AGC testing for ECOD?
Yeah, so that's a very popular request. We don't have a way software-wise to do that at this time. But I think, we've heard it from a few people, so it's definitely worth exploring. But at this time, we don't have the technology to do it.
Got it, thanks.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, we really appreciate your guys' engagement today. Thanks for joining us. So just to kind of recap, the feedback themes here that we had on our survey around user support and communication, RIMS issues, some documentation improvement, some clarity around telemetry testing, control and protection, as well as just reevaluating our timeline. So in that first presentation that Andrew gave, really hit on some of the structure changes that we're trying to make to address some of the communication gaps, hit on some of the documentation improvements from the GRDT, from the helpful links, and some of the trainings that's been provided by our customer experience team. Reviewed some of the changes in the timelines that we've had, as well as some of the RIMS efforts and some of the efforts going forward. Would love to hear your guys' feedback if you have ideas to make the submission process easier, and we can look at potentially integrating some of those ideas into our framework for next year's enhancements. Then we had Scott Vaughn go over the control and protection submission guidance. And with metering and telemetry, Jacob walked us through all of the NRI responsibilities and gave some helpful tips and tricks, and kind of really stressed that telemetry exemption, must have that extra data, going to be a lot tighter on how we approve those exemptions, as well as sharing our new documentation and procedures that'll be available to you guys by the end of the day. And then lastly, Drew and I hit on some of the operational concerns that we've been having for pre-COD resource performances, walking through that process in this new pilot test opportunity that you have in 5320B. So that is pretty much all we have for today. Finished up a little bit early, but really appreciate your guys' collaboration and comments. If you guys have suggestions for how you'd like to see certain training for next year's forum, please let us know. It's always great to connect, and I know that we're all just under a lot of pressure for these projects. So I guess just know that we feel it. We take it seriously. We are really trying to be as accommodating as we can with the number of projects we have, and happy to work with you all, and let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you. That concludes our meeting. We can now disconnect.